Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Learning the Tropes. I'm so excited to be joined by author Danielle Jackson, whose most recent novel, Accidentally in Love, is currently out. And you could hear us chat about that book a few episodes back. And so Danielle reached out and wanted to read a Beverly Jenkins novel, which I'm always down for. And she chose to read Night Hawk. So welcome, Danielle. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me back so soon. Also, I feel very honored that I get to come back like within the same season. This is very exciting.
Oh my God. Yeah, of course. Well, I'd love to hear, because we chatted a little bit about Beverly Jenkins on your episode, and
Yeah.
what made you choose this book in particular? Because you kind of messaged me out of the blue and you said, I got it. And I want to know
Yeah.
what
I
was
mean,
the
because
impetus.
I think briefly on my episode, we were like, oh, you should, you're like, come back. We'll talk about Beverly Jenkins. And I was like, I know exactly which one. It's very selfish. I knew I had this book. um, and I hadn't read it, and I had bought it. I think I bought this at Love Sweet Arrow, the romance bookstore
Mhm.
outside of Chicago, and but I just hadn't read it yet. And so I was like, this is the perfect opportunity to finally like sit down and read it. Because I think we all have out of control TBR lists. And it's always nice when you can kind of have a reason to sit down and read one. So yeah, that's really why I picked this one.
Yeah. Well, I was so excited once I started reading it because the last Beverly Jenkins I had read was The Taming of Jessie Rose for the podcast,
Hmm.
but that was like, and it feels like years ago. I'm so bad at time now, but it was back when we had Clayton, so it was a little while ago.
Yeah.
And so he was a character from that book. So I'm like, here we are. I'm reading the next one,
Yeah.
which I feel like
Awesome.
doesn't happen because of this podcast sometimes. Is like I'll read the first book in a series and I'll be like, oh, I want to keep going. But then, like you said, the TBR is growing over here.
Hmm.
So I was so happy to come back to it. We both when you mentioned this book, I knew nothing about it, but I knew the cover because this cover,
Yeah.
talk about a cover. I'll put
Oh
it
my
up
gosh.
here.
Yeah.
And yeah, so let's judge this cover.
I mean, it's great.
Hmm.
It's a beautiful black man doing that great romance thing where his shirt is open, but it's still tucked in. The abs are fully on display.
Yeah.
Like this is an ab cover. And it's the night sky. He's wearing all black. Also, these are the lowest jeans I've ever seen a man wear. Um, and they're
Oh, yes.
somehow still pulled up. I mean,
It's his
and
gun belt is at he's just like real low on his hips, but it's keeping his pants up,
yeah,
I guess.
yeah. And I what I really love is he's like looking off into the distance, but the way the cover is set up, he is looking exactly where Beverly Jenkins's name is. So like he is admiring Beverly Jenkins, we are admiring him. It's great. It's really I think this is just like a quintessential like cowboy romance cover.
Yeah, and Beverly Jenkins, especially her historicals, her covers are all like absolutely fantastic. And this
Yeah.
is like does what a cover was supposed to do where this book was burned into my memory as the cover and
Hmm.
I couldn't tell you nothing about what it was about or anything else, but I'm just like I know Nighthawk has a great cover
Yeah.
and therefore I'm assuming it's a great book. You're not supposed to do that judging, but
But also, then when you do read like the back cover and you find out he's a bounty hunter, yeah, the hardened bounty hunter, it's like, well, of course, yes,
yeah.
this man is a bounty hunter. Of course he is.
Right. And you mentioned right before we started recording that you're not like as into cowboy romances in general, which I
Yeah.
chat a little bit more about, but
Hmm.
he's not a cowboy. He's had a million jobs, has had a million names that somehow
Yes.
I was able to keep track of, but it wasn't easy.
Right.
And something that I loved about him as a character too is I feel like something that romance does sometimes is they'll be like, this person is a self-made man and he created this and he
Hmm.
came up from the gutter and he's 27. And you're like, okay, that's a lot to do.
Yeah.
in that amount of time. And I like because this man has lived a million lives. He's gone back and forth to Scotland. He's got a law
Yeah.
degree. He's been an outlaw. He's been a bounty hunter, all of it. And he's 38, which I'm like, I believe that a 38
Yes.
year old could have lived that life. But had he been like 28, I would have been like, okay, this seems like too much.
100%. I love that you brought that up because that was definitely something I wrote down. Like at the point when they do talk about his age, like, and it's very brief, you know. I don't
Yeah.
remember if it was like year, like he mentions the year he was such and such age or whatever. But yeah, when I figured out he was 38, I was like, yes, he has lived this life. He has seen some things. He knows what's going on. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
He's
But
also a
yeah, like
widower. Yeah.
oh yeah, right. There's so much in this book. I was thinking about this because this is a mass market. I have the mass market paperback, and I'm gonna look, including the author's note. It's 371 pages. So like if this book were a trade paper or a hardcover,
Mhm.
it would not be that long, really. Like I don't know the exact like ratio and how it all changes, but like I feel like so much happens in not a short book, but not a, like a tome of a book, you know? And I really admire that. I think that that is a testament to Miss Bev's storytelling.
Oh, yeah. Right. Well, before we get into kind of
Mhm.
talking about the book, would
Yeah.
you be able to let us know what the book is about? Just like a brief overview,
Oh
if
my gosh.
possible, which might
If
not be
possible.
possible.
I know. Okay, so Nighthawk is about a man whose birth name is Ian, but he goes by many names.
Yeah.
But Ian Vance is a half Scottish, half black man who is a former outlaw, but like you said, also has a law degree that he got in Scotland. and but he is currently a bounty hunter and US Marshal, and he is trying to get home to Wyoming. He's kind of ready to leave like his kind of wild days behind him or his bounty hunting days behind him. He's trying to get home to Wyoming. He runs into a sheriff who is transporting a woman named Maggie who has been charged with murder, which is technically true, but the man she ended up accidentally killing was a terrible human.
Mhm.
And but she needs to be transported to a different jail. And because he's a US Marshal, Ian is kind of tasked with taking her there because the other sheriff has to deal with something else in their small, like Midwestern, almost the Wild West town. And they go on a bit of a road trip across the middle of the country, run into a lot of people that they both kind of know, and a lot happens that I'm sure we'll get into. But eventually, you know, they're trying to get to their final destination where she'll be handed over to a different jail. But that, of course, does not happen because a lot of other stuff happens. It's like I'm thinking, I keep like stumbling because I'm thinking about all of the steps it takes to get where
Yeah.
they're going. And I was like, but then the goal kind of changes halfway through, but then it goes back to the original goal of getting her to the sheriff and all of these things. So I think that's where I want to leave it though.
Good. Yeah. Well, because there's like a lynch mob after her. That's the
Hmm.
father and the brothers of the guy that she killed.
Yes.
And so the sheriff has to take care of those guys, and that's why
Right.
Maggie goes with Ian Vance, Preacher, Nighthawk,
Hmm.
Vance Bigelow, however you want to refer to him. Um, what are your kind of like top line thoughts? Because so I,
Yeah,
for some reason, had thought that you had already read this book and were rereading, but this was your first time through
this
it.
was.
Mhm.
This was my first time reading Nighthawk, and I really liked it. I also like so this book was published in 2011, which both seems very recent, but also like a million years ago.
Mhm.
Um, and what I love about Beverly Jenkins's writing is that her books feel like old school romances to me. Like they're really big in scope, but the I feel like the storytelling is very straightforward. Like when something is said on page, that is what it is. And you kind of go with it, like no matter what. And I really
Mhm.
love that. Um, that you kind of you take it at face value, but then also like there are some absolutely beautiful descriptions of like everything, like the way she describes people, the her sex scenes are very beautifully described, I think. Um, yeah, just I knew I was definitely glad to, like I said earlier, like have a reason to read this book because I think it showcases kind of not quite so early on in her career, but kind of like at the midpoint, I think, of and leading up to like where we are now. But like you really get to see you see some of like the hallmarks of a Beverly Jenkins novel really taking hold, I think, through this book as well. So does that answer your question?
No, no, I mean, we're just having a
Yeah.
discussion, so it's
Yeah,
like you got a
yeah,
question. But
yeah.
I do have to say, like, my deep, dark secret when it comes to Beverly Jenkins is,
Mhm.
for the podcast we had read, Forbidden first, and then The Ballad of Jessie Rose, of
Mhm.
which Ian Vance appears, and I do have
Yeah.
to say, I always understood her to obviously be a talented writer, and
Excuse me.
but those books tended to be books that were kind of like about nice people in a small town kind of being nice.
Mhm.
I don't know, which is not like my flavor. And like
Yeah.
other it is for other people and that's what they enjoy. So and I always know I'm like I'm not reading the right Beverly Jenkins because
Mhm.
I do believe I obviously like believed in her talent and everything. Not that she needed me to.
Yeah.
But this book where it's like an adventure and a bodyguard romance and
Mhm.
they're on the run and they're on every train possible. Like I was like into it
Yeah.
so hard from the beginning in that I also did that thing of I needed to read it by the time we chatted, obviously, so I did have a
Right. Yeah,
deadline,
yeah,
but I also, like, didn't want it to end, so it was this weird thing
yeah.
where it's like, "Okay, I'll
Mhm.
read 2 chapters and then marinate on it," you know what I mean? Because I didn't wanna
Yeah.
blow through it fast because I fell in love with Maggie. I think she's one of the best heroines I've ever read and not talked
Yeah.
about in that kind of pantheon of, like, amazing heroines. And of
Right.
course, you fall in love with Ian as well because he's
Mhm.
I mean, like, talk about quintessential romance hero. He's,
Yeah.
like, good, but not too good, like, he has an edge, he will kill somebody, he will torture somebody. He did
Yeah.
torture somebody, but for the right reasons, I think, um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I just I really, really loved and connected to this book, and it like you said, it is an old school romance where I
Mhm.
feel like the trend right now for a lot of even historical romances are these kind of like smaller and quieter things, or there's just kind of like
Mhm.
one big set piece. And what I love about these historicals in this book in particular is like there's so many set pieces, so many things are happening.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to keep track, like constant motion. That
Mhm.
I really loved. It was so fantastic. So thank you for bringing it to me
You're so
because
welcome. Yeah, I let's talk about Maggie though, because I think we've talked a lot about Ian. I mean, he is on the cover, so we started with him. Um, but yeah, she's really cool because she's not, I think, like a typical like Wild West woman. You know, she isn't kind of the damsel in distress, but she also isn't like the woman. I mean, she knows how to take care of herself, but she's not like I was thinking of I recently was on another I basically am just trying to convince podcasts to let me come on and talk about Beverly Jenkins books because I was on the Torn Bodice book report a few weeks ago and
Mhm.
we talked about Tempest and in
Mhm.
Tempest the heroine's name is Reagan and she and Maggie are they're similar in that like they are very sure of themselves. They have things that have happened in their pasts and and they're kind of grappling with that but they really do kind of know how to take like I said they can take care of themselves which I think I really appreciated because I easily she could have just been like this woman who accidentally kills a guy but doesn't know how to do anything and I feel like a lot of different in the hands of a different author that's how it would have been she would have kind of just been this helpless like woman that he has to drag across the country. Whereas
Mhm.
here, I mean, Maggie tries to escape, what, like 3 times, I think, over the course of this novel. At one point, with the first sheriff, before she's with Ian, she gets like dragged behind a horse. And like,
That was awful.
it was so bad. It was so terrible. But like, at one point they're in the train. I think this is like right after she gets handed over to Ian, and they're on the train. He has her handcuffed to him so she can't try to escape. She's covered in dirt, like she's all scratched up, she's bloody and bruised. She smells terrible because she hasn't like bathed in a week or something.
Mhm.
Her hair is a mess, like, and she knows what she looks like, but a woman is kind of staring at her on the train, like doesn't know what else to do. And Maggie like snarls at her and and then the woman like faints and Maggie's like very pleased with herself. And I was like, yes, girl, you are my kind of woman. I love it so much.
Yeah, exactly. Maggie is yeah, she never loses, well, the trying to escape. Like you said, it's at least
Right.
3 times, but you feel that
Yeah.
she's always looking for the door, and she's
Mhm.
not she walks that line of not being helpless,
Right.
but allowing him to help her, where
Mhm.
she's not just kind of like pig-headedly independent, but she's kind of like, well, my parents died when I was 12. So, and
Right.
I've had to be on my own and work for people and figure things out. And
Mhm.
so I have been able to do that. But like, also, when Ian uh offers to buy her all new clothes, she allows it to
Yeah.
happen. She's like, yeah, this is great. I want all new clothes. In a way that
Right.
sometimes think heroines are like, no, I couldn't possibly spend your money. And I'm like, spend his money.
Right. Yeah, he's got the money.
Yeah.
I loved their relationship even before they're romantically interested in each other. Like, I think Ian does give her, like, kind of a baseline of respect. So, like, when
Mhm.
even though he handcuffs them together so she can't escape, she assumed that she would, like, be in the back of the train, like, in the cattle cart, like, with the horses and the cat and the, like, livestock that people were transporting, and he's like, "Well, no, like, you're staying up here with me because
Mhm.
and it's like it somehow it is conveyed much more eloquently than how I'm explaining it, but it is conveyed that he's like, "No, you are a person, you can sit in a seat that is paid for, like, you're fine, like, come sit here," even though she is, like I said, covered in like dirt and bloody and bruised and
Mhm.
she's snarling at people. He still is kind of like, no, you're a human being, like you can be up here. And I think that that really, that's how it sets the tone, I think, between them, is that he is going to treat her with respect. And even though she does try to escape again, she also, I think, respects him kind of from the start because he talks to her like she's a regular person, which I think is really important.
Right, and even when she is escaping him, it's never him she's escaping, but she knows kind of what's at the end of the
Hmm.
journey, which she
Yeah.
feels accurately. Like, I don't think that her fear is also, like, unwarranted, where she's like, "Well, I'm a woman of color. I did kill this guy." Like, and granted, I didn't mean to, but he
Hmm.
was basically, like, this man tries to assault her. She hits him with a rolling pin, right? And then
Hmm.
he falls and hits his head on a counter and dies,
Yeah.
which, like, no big loss, I think, there, but, like, also she did
No.
kill him.
Yes.
Um, but so she's, you know, I agree where there is that kind of like spark at the beginning that
Mhm.
isn't necessarily romantic, but also what I love about them falling in love and kind of Ian falling in love with her is like he just gets kind of like a kick out of her from the beginning. Like he
Yeah.
just respects her and is just like, this woman is crazy and she's fantastic and like she has
Mhm.
this spirit and he appreciates her for trying to run. Maybe because he was an outlaw and now he's a
Yeah.
lawman, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I love to okay, I one of my favorite, like, dichotomies between them is every stop they make on this, like, train road trip, one of them sees someone they know. And but the
Mhm.
reaction is totally different. Like, so when Ian, like, walks into a room, everyone's like, "Oh, that's Preacher." Like, "Oh, there he goes. There's the famous bounty hunter." Like, everyone's obsessed with him. He's so great. And he kinda is just like, "Yeah, I am. That's me. That's cool." Um, but when she sees someone, usually someone who she worked for in some way, it's always like, "Well, yeah, like, this woman, like, I worked at a school, and this girl, one
Oh,
of
the
the
nun.
students, yeah,
Yeah.
one of the students like said that I did something when really the student had done it. So they literally like lined up all the students, and every student got to hit Maggie like wherever they wanted. And so
Mm.
she's like, I'm not staying here. So she runs, but before she runs, she pours all of the bedpans like all over the beds in the school, which I was like, that's amazing. But she sees, yeah, she sees her employer, and like, and every one of those like bad employers like gets their comeuppance, which I think is amazing. Like, if there is a truly terrible person, Beverly Jenkins will not shy away from one, them getting their comeuppance and being humiliated, but in some cases people die, and
Yeah.
it's like, that's just, and that's what happens because they're bad people.
Which I also love. I don't like the kind of trope of like, I'm like, yeah, if somebody sucks in a romance novel, like kill them. Like, let's get,
Yeah.
this is revenge fantasy. Like, sometimes people need to die. I don't remember what happened to the nun though. Like, what did she do to the nun?
I'm
Well, I
trying,
know
I'm
she did the
gonna,
bedpan thing.
yeah, wait, I know I wrote it down, so just give me a second. You can obviously delete all of this of me like paging through notes, but I know I wrote this down where she meets her. Hang on.
She's the
I'm trying
first
to
one that he
remember.
comes
Yeah,
across.
she is, and I don't know. You may just have
But
to
you're
delete
right,
this because
because
I don't
and
think,
whenever
yeah.
anybody sees Maggie, they're like, this bitch. Like,
Yeah.
and are immediately angry with her. And I like that Ian always kind of is like, all right, well, why, what did you do this time? And every time she tells him, he's like, I get it. I would have done the same thing.
Yeah, she
So in that way,
she
they're soulmates.
yeah, she kind of she knows the way to get to people, because later there's a man, a truly terrible dude who she worked for, and like was in kind of like a singing group that he took across, like across the country kind of. And like the way she got back at him was absolutely amazing. Like, she figured, so she like gives her virginity to this guy, and but come to find out he's like sleeping with the other girls in the group, but also has like women in every city that he goes to. So she puts hot sauce like in his condoms, and like he's humiliated, and eventually like he like announces to the train car at one point that like she's actually a prostitute and he's had his way with her and blah blah blah. And she's like, no, dude, like, you took advantage of me. And also, I know what's going on with like your manhood because I put hot sauce in your condoms. Like, and she tells everyone, and he is absolutely humiliated. And then Ian like literally throws him off of a moving train. So like
And
he's
he
gotten rid of.
certainly dies. Because I
Right.
was like, you're not surviving this. This is crazy. Well, that was great. I mean, that was awful for her, but I think it also
Right.
showed kind of, she thought that this man and her were actually in a relationship. And the
Mm-hmm.
way that he got her to kind of, act as a sex worker for one night was basically by
Yeah.
like pleading to her kind of like, goodness, and we need this money and it'll only be this one time, which
Mm-hmm.
is I think like what happens a lot of times with
Yeah.
coercive sex work. And so um I thought that was like both true to probably what Maggie's experience would have been, but also the way that
Yeah.
it was treated in the book, where Ian was just like, I believe that this happened, and I also believe that it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter that it happened. And it's kind of
Yeah.
never brought up again. It's not something that she necessarily struggles with. It is definitely something she's embarrassed of, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
fine. Um, but it's not this big weight that like Ian has to overcome in order to fall in love with her or anything like that. He's like, he's over it once that door shuts and that man is
Yeah.
tumbling,
Yeah.
to his death, which also like I'm fine with too. Um, yeah, but you're right. The differences of them meeting, because also everybody loves Ian everywhere he goes
Oh my gosh,
too.
everywhere. He is like a saint among men, apparently.
He always knows. He every time he comes to town, he's always like, I know a little spot. I don't know if it's still
Yeah,
around though. And then it always is. And there's always just like a very nice woman who feels very like
right.
motherly towards him, maternal, who's going to take him in and take care of him. And I'm like, this is great. I like he's cultivated all these women all over
And
the country.
yeah, and all of them like pull Maggie aside and are like, he's in love with you. And Maggie, one time, the first time Maggie's like, what are you talking about? No, he's not. And then the second time, she's just like, oh, maybe he is. Yeah, okay. And and then that's kind of when because they eventually do have a physical relationship. They actually have, I'm sure we'll talk about this in Tropes, but they do that wonderful thing where they say, okay, let's have this one night
Mhm.
together, because the next day they're finally going to reach the destination, so he can kind of hand her over to this the other authorities that he needs to drop her off to. And so they do have their one night, and it's great, it's wonderful. And they yeah, and I think that's like kind of where things turn, where they're just like, oh, maybe we don't want this handover to happen, even though it does end up happening, but it's very
Mhm.
their separation is very brief. Yeah, so it was cool.
I think their first time coming together is interesting to talk about because
Hmm.
they're staying in a brothel, basically,
Right.
and the madam gives her, like, this sheer short peignoir
Yeah.
to wear, and he has gone to avenge something or somebody. He has murdered somebody who had murdered his whose brother murdered a man in front of his family, so he had to murder
Yeah.
him. This is all said obviously more eloquently in the book, and you're like, "Got it." He confronts him in the saloon, and he
Yeah.
immediately shoots him in front of his sons, and he's like, "All right, I'll help you, like, bury your father." And the sons are like,
Right.
"Okay, yeah, that was weird. He shouldn't have come here." And he comes home and he's really, like, broken up about it because, he
Yeah.
has a soul. And she offers him kinda like that physical comfort
Hmm.
as well. It's obviously something she wants as well. It's an experience
Yes.
that she wants to have. But something that I thought was interesting about it is, like, any time that she had had sex previously, I mean, it seemed like there was no foreplay. It did not seem
Yeah.
good for her. A couple of times it was coerced, and I found it that them coming together, no pun intended, but very interesting as far as, like, where both of them were emotionally and kind of like what their each of their expectations was out of the act, you know?
Yeah. I think like she wanted to care for him, and I think
Mhm.
she recognized that, it was something they both had kind of been avoiding talking about. I think like they had been having one thing I really loved too is, they're handcuffed together a lot of the time, especially when they're like not on the train. They are handcuffed together
Mhm.
because he doesn't want her to run, because he wants to like get his task done. But then they're like in bed, they have to share a bed. There's no choice because
Right.
she's got to be next to him because they're handcuffed. And they
Well,
really,
also because
in
the
fact,
first time they spent the night, she ran,
yeah,
so he just
right,
doesn't
exactly.
trust her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, they like just start talking to each other, and they like kind of find out, like he finds out about like her parents, who seemed amazing and
Mhm.
really cool, and she really wants to finish going to school, she wants to become a teacher, and he kind of tells her about his dead wife, with and he starts to notice how different they are. And it's for both of them, like she's letting her guard down because she's had to have guards up around her literally to survive. And here's a person who's capable of taking care of her, but also like recognizes that she can also take care of herself, which I thought was really interesting. And then with Ian, he is letting his guard down because he thinks after his first wife, he's never going to love anyone again. But here's this woman who is completely different than his first wife. And he's coming to care for her in a way that he just didn't think was possible again. So I think, and then when we finally get to that very first love scene between them, it really is like a love scene. Like I think it's their way of saying like, oh, maybe not love quite yet, but they really do care and respect and like want the best for each other. So that's why they express it that way.
Yeah, I thought it was really beautiful, and
Hmm.
we can Tilda, who is his first wife, is such an interesting character too,
Yeah.
and I wonder what it was that made him why she was the way she was. So she was a woman
Yeah.
who was not interested in having children. She was somebody who was very proper. She didn't want to share a
Hmm.
bedroom with him, um, and didn't
Yeah.
really enjoy having sex very much.
Right.
Um, which, I mean, we both have seen this cover, and so that seems like the craziest fiction of the whole book. But Um, eh, yeah, I think books with widows or widowers are always interesting because of the framing of the first
Yeah.
partner, the first spouse. Yeah.
I was gonna say, do you think it's kind of like that was what was expected? Like, she was probably back then considered like an ideal, proper wife, even though, and
Mhm.
maybe it was like his way, because I think, in this book, he's going home so he can kind of put everything done. He's done being a bounty hunter. He's left his outlaw ways. He's not going back to Scotland. Like, his grandfather at the very beginning of the book, like, makes it clear, like, if you come back here, like, there's really nothing for you. Your mother has passed away.
Mhm.
So I think it was kind of, maybe marrying Tilda was like his way of like starting that transition to be like, I'm gonna have a wife, I'm gonna have my ranch, I'm gonna have my horses, and that's gonna be what I do. And then, but then I mean, I should say, he doesn't, it's not like in, how in some romance novels where there's like a dead spouse and you're just like, it's like, oh, I never really loved them like the way I love this new person.
Right.
This is the new person is. But I think he's always, even at the end, I think he maintains that no, like, he really did genuinely like care for and love Tilda. She is just a different person than Maggie. Um,
Mhm.
and so I went, yeah, like when I was reading it, I think I was like, oh, Tilda was just like that ideal, like that's how a wife in quotes should have been. And then, but here's this woman who is the total opposite to her, and he loves her too. So
Mhm.
I don't know. Yeah, it was interesting. I thought it was handled well.
Yeah. I think that's a good point too, and also, if you think about it, he never had great modeling for a
Hmm.
relationship because his father, like, it seems he never met his father because it seems like his
Hmm.
father was a naval guy
Right.
who docked his mom and then kind of bounced and
Yeah.
maybe didn't even know that he had a child. um
Right.
and then his mother was in a kind of like a mistress arrangement for a while with a guy who seemed like pretty decent.
Yeah.
um so I understand how you would swing so far the other way to be
Yeah.
like, I want this person who's like very proper and
Hmm.
this is what it's supposed to be like. And
Yeah.
yeah, having not been introduced yet to Maggie. But you're right. I like that she's not somebody that he's like, actually, I never loved her. Cause that always
Right.
feels so
It
mean.
feels real gross. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, I always respect her for who she was because she did die for him, which
Exactly.
is tough.
I know. Oh.
Poor Tilda.
Yeah.
Uh, something that Bev always puts in her books that I love is or Miss Bev, she always adds like a historical element in a way that
Yeah.
feels very natural. And I think that part of that has
Hmm.
to come from her characters and in probably an unfair way, having to justify why her characters are people of color, which is
Right.
the historical part is interesting. We also learn about like the Chinese Exclusion Act
Hmm.
through one of Vance's friends,
Yeah.
and other
Her name
just kind
was
of like
Jade.
historical women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really cool. I agree. I think Miss Bev incorporates history just like seamlessly. And sometimes not so much in this one, but in other books by her, there'll be like a paragraph or two where it's just like explaining like the context of something, and I think that's so great. It's so interesting. And like, I tell people all the time, because I know some people don't read author's notes or they don't read like acknowledgments and stuff, but
Hmm.
never skip an author's note by Beverly Jenkins, because there is always like just a trove of information about what was going on during the time of this. And then, but in this one, there's a really sweet story about why Maggie is named Maggie, and
Hmm.
like she's based off of, or kind of inspired by, a woman who she met at a signing. Like, it's really great. So yeah, never skip the author's note in a Beverly Jenkins novel.
I know. Can you
Yeah.
imagine Maggie like You go to have your author sign a book and she's like, "Actually,
Yeah.
I'm going to write one
Yeah.
of the greatest heroines, and she'll be basically based on you," because Maggie
Yeah.
is her mother was Kaw and her father was Black, and that's
Yeah.
this Maggie that showed up at the signing as well, and I just find that so funny. I mean,
I love it.
amazing and amazing for her,
Yeah.
and I you would explode basically.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
really cool. I loved that. I love author's notes. Like I love and acknowledgments and dedications, like
Mhm.
because also they're as someone who's had to do this 2 times now, and now like when I do write something that I think is like has potential to be published, I like start them in my drafting process because they're really hard to write and to like kind of
Yeah.
be poignant. You want to be poignant or you want to be funny or you want to be clever or whatever, but you also like, I also like, I know I'd forget someone or I'll forget like a point that I looked like something interesting I looked up. So yeah, I really love that. Just in general, I think they're so fun. So don't skip them, everyone. Read them. We put them there.
For a reason. I always
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
Um Well, something interesting about this book too. So basically they get to a point where um they realize somehow that Maggie basically isn't going to be like they're going to drop the
Hmm.
charges, but they just need kind of confirmation of the charges
Right.
being dropped. And they have to continuously go to different towns because for some reason or another the telegraph offices just
Yeah, that was great.
don't work. um there's a the moment on the train. So oh no, wait. He drops her off at the with the one sheriff, and they're
Yeah.
saying their goodbyes, and I'm like, "Why are you 2 idiots pretending that you don't love each other at this stage?" But obviously it made me mad, but you're supposed to be mad at that stage.
Yeah. Yes.
And, um, it turns out he's a bad guy
Right.
because Maggie somehow only meets bad guys and Ian Vance. And brings her basically to this saloon where she's gonna have to sing, and all of the women
Mhm.
are basically, um, captives there being held.
Yeah, he's so the man, where's his name? I have it
Oh,
written down,
Sheriff
of course I do.
Granger.
Yes, Granger. So he is a sheriff, but basically when a woman is convicted for something and is brought to his jail, instead of keeping them in the jail and putting them on trial or whatever, he basically is a pimp. He takes them to a brothel and is like, "You are
Mhm.
gonna like work out your sentence here." And so there are all of these women who have it seems like kind of minor offenses, but they are forced to sell themselves or work the stage or work in the bar or whatever, serve drinks or whatever. Yeah, and so Ian's like on the train. It's like basically on the train to leave, and someone who saw them before is like, "Oh, where is that woman you were with?" And he kind of explains like, "Oh, I had to leave her with the sheriff, blah blah blah." And
Mhm.
the guy's like, "Oh, not with Granger. He's terrible, and this is what he does." And so Ian gets off and goes back and is like, and rides literally into the saloon on his horse, which I thought was great visual, perfect, absolutely stunning.
Oh my god. Doesn't recognize Maggie because she's wearing a red dress.
Oh yeah,
But, um, yeah, and then basically takes all of the women out of there,
yeah,
brings them to the depot and gives them all money to go wherever they wanna
yeah.
go.
Hmm.
But they all end up on a train together, and they all end up in, like, what seems like the bar car or whatever, the smoking car, and
Yeah,
everybody's just kind of, like, partying, and there's this, like, young lawyer who's coming out west for some reason, and he's, like, really into Maggie,
yeah.
and Vance is not loving it, and I'm such a sucker for scenes like this, like,
Oh yeah.
when the starchy hero pretends he doesn't love the heroine, and so someone else starts moving in, and he's like, "No,
Hmm.
actually,
Yep.
he's bad news," and I'm like, He does seem like a nice enough guy. He's a doctor maybe. He's some
Yes, he's a
professional."
doctor. Yeah, and he
Yeah.
is clearly there just to make Ian jealous, and I am here for. I live for that scene. Like it's perfect. And he gets Ian gets so worked up. So the guys finally like I think they're dancing. Ian and Maggie end up dancing after dinner, and the doctor is kind of like, okay, like these two are clearly something's going on. And he gets
Right.
like so worked up, they have to go out the back of the train car and between two train cars, like have sex and in the outdoors, the great outdoors. And it's great. They have a great time.
Oh, it's phenomenal because also whenever characters have sex outside, I'm always like, guys, like anybody can walk out. You aren't far from everybody. Like this is crazy. And she's also like, her pants are fully down. And then she
Yeah.
also like after he finishes, he goes to get a cloth and she just stands there. She's like, I don't know, it's kind of sexy to stand here like this, like half naked. I'm like,
Yeah,
Maggie.
she's like, she'd never done anything like I think at some point she's like, "I've never
Yeah.
done anything like this before." It's like, "Yeah, I think you and most people."
Yeah,
Um,
you and everyone else. Oh my God, it's
yeah,
amazing. It's so hilarious. And but that's kind of the scene where I think they realize like, okay, like this is happening. That's when they end up going to Jade's and he asks her to marry him that first
yeah.
night as they're
Well,
having
he
sex.
kind of he does ask her, like, he's like, "You don't have to go," because she decides, "Okay, I can't go back to Kansas." That's the
Mhm.
stipulation, like, the charges are thrown out, but you can't come back to Kansas because the sheriff is like, "I have no control over these people here. If you come back, they're going to kill you, so don't come back to
Yeah.
Kansas." So she's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go back east to Oberlin College and, like, go to the same school my dad went to," because it was one of the first colleges that let Black people go there, and her dad had graduated from there. And so that's what she decides to do. And he's fine. Ian's kind of like, well, you could just like come back to Wyoming and you don't have to live with me or anything, but you can like stay with this woman who I know. Cause of course he knows a woman who owns a boarding house because that's everyone he knows in his life. And
Is
he,
either a
and so,
madam or owns a boarding house.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so she's kind of like, okay. So, oh, cause he also tells her, he's like, yeah, there's a school. Like you could just teach at the school. Like there is no school. And he knows this because the
He also
town is
says
so
there's 12
small.
students and there's
Yeah.
not 20 kids in this town.
And so she's like, "Okay, yeah, sounds good." And then literally a day later, he's like, "Actually, we should get married." And they do.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, but they do. So,
Yeah. This book was interesting too because 75% of the book is them basically on this like wild chase
yeah.
of always trying to get somewhere or get out of somewhere. And then
Mhm.
at 75% we end up in Wyoming and it switches to a pretty like pastoral novel. And
Yeah,
I read the whole thing kind of on the edge of my seat because I'm like, when's the other shoe going to drop? Like
right.
we have so much left and everything seems great. Like, I
Yeah.
thought that the school not actually existing was gonna be a bigger thing. She fully
Mhm.
could care less. One of
Right.
his neighbors is like, "You can just use my front parlor." She's like, "Okay, cool, fantastic, let's go," and does it.
Yeah.
Um, I found that I don't know, that was the only part that I found a little
Mhm.
strange, like, how
I
there was
agree.
so little conflict that last 25%, and not that I
Yeah.
didn't like just seeing them in love and setting up house, but I don't know. Maybe as an author, like you could speak to like why you think
Yeah.
that that kind of switch happened.
You know what? I had the same reaction because I don't know, maybe I'm too like I think in like the modern romance novel, it's like when you get to 75, 80%, and if they're still together, you're kind of waiting for something to break them up for a
Yeah.
chapter or whatever. Um and I on the one hand I actually really liked that there really isn't a third act breakup. There isn't like they kind of are like we're married, we're in it. Like let's go. Like, when are we having kids basically because
Right.
it's a western. But I was wondering, but I'm not well versed in western romances or even really like just the general western. Like I didn't watch like a ton of like old west movies or anything like, when I was homesick or whatever. Um so I wonder if that is like a thing that happens where it's like kind of the big overarching conflict gets resolved and then it's like it's almost like the epilogue, like kind of what an epilogue does. It's like, oh, here we're proving these people should stay or will stay together and they're gonna,
Mhm.
like I think of the epilogues that I wrote, and this isn't like their romances, they end up together. But in my first epilogue, I had they proposed, they got engaged in that epilogue. And the second one, they decide to move in together. So it's kind of like showing the future is going to happen in some way. But I felt like the end of this book, I guess, just proved that they could like live together and survive the Wild West. They could survive the
Mhm.
wilds of Wyoming. So that's kind of how I took it, but I did find it really interesting because it was almost a whole entire other story, a different story that happens the last 25%. So it was really interesting. And it was definitely a little bit jarring. It was kind of like,
Hmm.
oh, this is new, this is different. Okay. Um, but I still enjoyed it because it was very quick and very dramatic.
There was still a lot that happened. Like this woman that
Hmm.
had a huge crush on Ian had
Yeah.
Henny, like throws them a
Hmm.
party, but the party goes well. And,
Right.
Maggie is told at a certain stage, oh, there's all these women that are going to hate you because all these women
Yeah.
have like wanted to get with Ian. And so she does meet, she meets basically Henny and like one other woman, but she's not phased by them really, it seems
No.
at all. She really puts them
Yeah.
in her place in a way that's like really fantastic.
Right.
Yeah, and then you just see her kind of integrating herself into his life in Wyoming, and Charlie, who is his like de facto father figure who lives on the property
Yeah.
with them and takes
Hmm.
care of the house. Um and then at like the very end, she gets kidnapped, which I think that
Oh.
was the only thing that like needed resolution, was kind of like whoever had killed Tilda, like you still
Hmm.
felt that there was a threat out there. And
Yeah.
so she gets kidnapped. Um, but pretty quickly when they stop, she um puts a pen like squibs in his
Yeah.
eye and throat and then runs.
Yeah.
They find her because she's running down the road like, gee, like this guy
Yeah.
tried to kidnap me. And so yeah, that's, like, kind of the dramatic thing to happen at the end, but it's not something that keeps them apart for very long,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely that it was I keep saying it was interesting. It was a choice
Yeah.
to take the story in that direction, and but it kind of does in a very roundabout way. It really does like tie up all the loose threads. It's complicated to explain like how all of these people are actually connected. Like all the bad people are kind of all
Mhm.
connected and lead to this conclusion where a man is basically told like we're tying you to this tree and we're leaving you here, and if you make it through the end of the night, because the bears will smell the blood that's coming out of you from this quill pen that my wife just stuck in your throat. If they don't eat you, we'll come back and we'll finish the job tomorrow. So ugh.
It's so, like, diabolical. It's such a
It
crazy
really
thing,
is.
to have a hero do towards the end, but I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, he did try to kill your wife, so have
Right.
at it. Do what you gotta
Yeah.
do." You mentioned at the beginning that kind of like westerns weren't necessarily your thing. So I'd
Hmm.
love to like, is it just something you never have like connected with? Was there a reason? Do you feel differently after reading the book?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know why I just never thought it was like my thing. I think well, I was
Mhm.
saying like I never really watched like John Wayne movies or any of like those old movies. And I think it's because I just remember like my dad or like my, like uncles or whatever, they if one was on, like that was what was on TV. I was like, this black and white movie is so boring. They're all just like riding horses. Like what's happening? And so maybe that's why I avoided them. But now that especially Beverly Jenkins, I think maybe I need to give like Western romance a chance because I've read a couple of like Laverl Spencer's historicals, and both the two that I've read have been have been westerns as well. So
Mhm.
maybe I do like westerns. I just need to actually read them.
Yeah. Well, something that like that Beverly Jenkins does is I think the Western was much more like diverse, and it was this
Hmm.
literal frontier where people had a lot more freedom, people who didn't
Yeah.
necessarily have freedom, on the East Coast or wherever.
Hmm.
There was like the major cities at the time. And there is a lot of, especially like those old John Wayne Western stuff. There's so much like whitewashing, and it's white
Yeah.
people and Native Americans, and that's kind of it.
Right.
And that was never the case. Um, they're making a show about Boss Tweed with David Oyelowo, which I'm
Oh
excited about.
yeah, that looks
What's his name
great.
is doing it? Sheridan is doing it. So I think that'll
Oh,
be
nice. Yeah.
exciting. And then the newest Magnificent Seven and stuff, it does seem like there's more of a
Hmm.
conscious effort of like how the West actually was, because the Lone Ranger was probably Black, like the person that he was
Right. Yeah.
um based on and things like that. So, and also the role that women played out there, where a lot of times it was these sex workers who were the only women in a town, and they had
Hmm.
children, and then the children needed to go to school, and then the
Right.
children needed, you needed to set up a life around that. And
Totally.
it's how these towns came to be. And I think it's interesting, and I think that these are the only books that I've read. I mean, not to paint too broad of a brush, and I haven't read every Western, so that I could have missed
Yeah.
something is always a strong possibility. Um, but a lot of times you don't see this kind of out there, because
Hmm.
even you see, there's talking about how Wyoming women had the vote from
Yeah.
statehood, and there was a
Hmm.
female mayor, which also would have been kind of historically accurate. So yeah, it's something that I really appreciate about her novels, for sure.
Definitely. I love it. Yep.
Good stuff. Listen, she knows what she's doing.
Yeah. She knows what's up.
um should we do, did you happen to make a list of tropes?
I did. I did. You know,
Yeah.
I'm a long time listener. I tried to come prepared because I was like, oh, because even this morning I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to say what it's about, and I don't know how to explain this. And then I fumbled through that summary. So, but this I'm ready for.
Okay, good. No, well, it's so funny because whenever I would ask Clayton that, he always started very specific with the meet cute.
Yeah.
And then he'd like be running out of time, and I'm like, say it broader. And he just like never could. Not to critique him, he's not here to defend himself, but I think I said that to him enough times that he knows.
Yeah.
All right, let's hear your list.
Okay, I've got Western slash
Hmm.
historical romance. Kind of enemies to lovers. Like they technically, I think it's very like literally the first like chapter, they're enemies to lovers.
Like
Road trip,
adversaries to lovers, kind of.
adversaries. That's a better word. Yes,
Hmm.
adversaries to lovers. Yep. Road trip, just one bed, on the run, dead wife, or widower. What widower would be nicer? Widower
Yeah.
hero would be a nicer way to put that. Former bad boy, since he was an
Hmm.
outlaw. He falls first. He's definitely like kind of all in before she's basically there, but won't admit it. And then
Hmm.
just one night to get it out of our systems.
Just One Night is such a great, it
Just
never
one
is just
night.
one
Yep.
night, but I just like
I know.
love it. And
Yeah.
like a bodyguard romance, like I do love
Mm-hmm.
him saving her. Even though,
Yeah.
I mean, he does. A few times he saves her, a few times she saves herself, a few times she runs.
Yep.
Um, yeah. Heroine on the run, escaping, bodyguard romance. Yeah, I think those are all
Yeah.
there. Great.
Awesome.
Any
Yay.
last thoughts about Nighthawk by Beverly Jenkins?
I don't think so. I think we covered it. I hope we covered it.
I'm sure there's a lot more. We haven't talked about the Julys. There's so many like couples that are brought up that I'm like, do they have a book? Do they have a book? Will they have a book?
Some
Like
of
the
them I
sheriff
think
and the
do.
mayor. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think some of them do. I will say too, I mentioned earlier that I recently reread Tempest for another podcast, and I think
Hmm.
Tempest is also set like in a small Wyoming kind of frontier town, and I think it's a pretty good companion to Nighthawk. They're
Okay.
different and they're separate stories, but I think it would be a good companion piece.
Yeah, because this is not like a necessarily sequel, but Preacher has
Hmm.
appeared in at least two other books. But it's all
Right.
kind of like everything exists in the same universe more
Yeah.
than like a
Everything.
specific.
Did you know? I've had the privilege of like hearing Beverly Jenkins speak more than once, and her historical novels are all the ancestors of her like contemporary novels. So she writes also romantic suspense and like
Yeah,
what we
yeah.
would call women's fiction, kind of more so than romance. But they are all like they're all the same like people. They're all from the same like families, which I was just like, that's amazing. Why isn't this a show? Like why you could
I
have like set in the past and then like foiled with what's going on in the present. Like no one can see me. My arms are huge because I'm so excited. Like at the idea of this becoming something in reality.
I know, like, how much fun would this have been as, like, yeah. I don't know why
Yeah,
people don't give me millions of dollars for the great ideas I have, but it's like,
seriously.
if this was a mini series that then led into that little Wyoming town being an ongoing series,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, we're in. There's so many different little come
Oh
on,
my God,
let's do
so
it,
great.
people. Like, you greenlit all this awful stuff. Like, all this whatever. I always get a soapbox because I'm like, if we have so many effing, and no offense, but to Marvel and
Oh my
fucking
gosh,
Star
yeah,
Wars, I'm like, I can't have, like, we can't have half that budget for Beverly Jenkins universe, like, please.
seriously.
Although I guess Forbidden has been optioned by Sony. So,
Right.
but that was
Yes.
years ago.
That was a long time ago. Why hasn't this been made?
I know, call
Yeah.
me. I have ideas. I'm not the person to actually work on it, but I would love to be around.
Seriously. Yeah.
I'll
Executive
yeah.
producer. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, listen. That's more than I was thinking like PA, but yeah, executive producer would be great.
Yeah. Just oversee or showrunner. There you go.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, it's such a complex universe, and whenever authors also do that, like Sarah McLean does that too, I'm always like,
Hmm.
how? And she's like, it's
I know.
easier because you already have people, and you don't have to come up with like a new person who runs a dress shop. And I'm like, I guess
Yeah.
so, but how do they not like
Yeah.
knock into each other or something? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But
Well,
anyway, if you haven't read this book, it's fantastic, and you should
yeah.
read
It's a
it.
lot of fun. It's super
Hmm.
fun. Yep.
And you'll plow through it. I would also say this is like a stump buster for me because I was in like a
Yeah.
tiny stump.
Hmm.
And this really, I was like, oh my God, I love romance novels. Guys,
Right.
again.
It does. I mean, that's how I thought. I finished this and I was like, well, now I need another one. And thankfully, she
Hmm.
has a very extensive backlist.
Hmm.
And I haven't seen when, like, what her next one is, but hopefully she'll make, I need to like check because I know I'm signed up for whatever alerts or whatever. And so, yeah, hopefully she has a new one soon.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully she has many new. You said the
Many new
midpoint of her
ones.
career. I was like, no, no midpoint.
I know,
Let's
right?
keep it going.
Ongoing forever,
Yeah, yeah,
forever.
yeah. So what has you swooning
Okay.
this week, this
Um,
month?
I'm cheating because I have like kind of a collective. It's like it's more than one thing, but they all
Okay,
go
go.
together. I am swooning over like gentle TV. Like, after watching shows that I love, like Succession and Euphoria, but those shows they're so intense. There are a lot of bad people or like very
Mhm.
sad people just getting into trouble. I am so excited because, while we're recording, the Great British Baking Show has like just come back.
Love
I
it.
tore through Virgin River and Heartstopper and recently watched the fourth season of a show called Sex Education. These are all Netflix shows, which is interesting to think about. But anyway, they're just easy to watch. Like things happen, like and things are dramatic, like within the confines of the world that has been created. Yeah, and I would even include Great British Baking Show because I mean, people get very worked up over how long
Oh,
something is in the
very
oven.
stressed. Yeah.
But it's still like people are nice to each other. People are
Yeah.
like happy to be around on, shows like Heartstopper and Sex Education. Like I was like, man, if teenagers are really like these teenagers on these shows, like the world's going to be okay. And then
Mhm.
Virgin River is just like even though the things are high stakes on that show, it's still like low stakes. Like low stakes, high stakes. You know what I mean? Like cuz some of the
Right.
things
Like,
are
everything's gonna be
ridiculous.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I not a spoiler, I don't think, but how is Charmaine still pregnant on Virgin River?
We stopped watching halfway through last season because
Yeah.
honestly, because we had certain opinions about one of the main characters. People did
Yeah.
not agree with us, and they wrote us such mean emails that we were
Oh
like,
no.
we're like, "Fine, we won't do it I don't know, we just didn't want to anymore.
Yeah.
Clayton kinda didn't
Yeah.
want to. So now I keep getting emails from people like, "Hey, like, I think these episodes actually got deleted of you reviewing the rest of Virgin River." I'm like, "Funny
Nope.
story. People did not like our opinions, and they
Well,
made
here
it
you
known."
go. Yeah,
I
update.
know, we
Charmaine's
might
still
come back.
pregnant.
how the timeline of Virgin River is the most shocking thing about Virgin
It's
River.
wild. Yep.
It's like an entire season will be 4 days, and you're like, "What?"
Yep, exactly. Oh, that's wild. All right, what has
And
you
how
swooning? Oh, go
oh,
ahead.
wait, but I wanna know, how do you feel about
Yeah.
Allison on GBBO? Great British Bake Off.
Ooh. I like her. I think she's
I
fun.
like her too.
I mean, it's only been what, a couple of episodes at this point, it's only been a couple of episodes. Even the second one's not even for the US. It's not even up yet.
Mhm.
And I think she's really fun. I can't wait for her to I think she needs to like loosen up a little. Um, but like I love her just in general as a host. I think she's really funny and dynamic. Like if you search, I think what's her last name is Hammond. I think Allison Hammond. There's this interview that she did with Harrison Ford and Ryan
Yes.
Gosling that is so funny. Like that's what I want to see. Like I want that to start happening a little bit more, but for right now, like she's a pro. She knows what she's doing. She hosts like kind of Good Morning America, but in the UK, and she's great. So I like it.
Oh, yeah, because I did not like the other guy,
No,
Matt.
no. Yep.
I didn't think
No,
he was a good
wasn't.
fit because you have Neil, right? Is that the guy, the spooky?
No, no,
No,
yeah.
you have Noel, who is kind of a little bit, I mean, he's kind to the contestants, but
Yes,
has an edge to him, and I'm like, "I need somebody who's, like, kind of pure sunshine and silliness the way that, like,
yes.
all the other hosts were," and, like, that is Allison. Like, she's
Yep.
so, like, bubbly and funny and up and positive that
Mhm.
I'm like, "Yeah, this is the yin and the yang that we need from the 2
Yeah.
hosts, not, like, just 2 guys who are, like, fairly similar." That's my, like,
Yes. I agree
uh
wholeheartedly. Yep.
yeah. I'm swooning about a show as well that I think I would consider like a soft show. It's Starstruck. It's on
I
Max.
haven't watched it yet, but yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
So good.
formerly HBO Max, now Max.
No, Max.
There's been a lot of things pieces about it. So it's the 4th, it's the final season.
Mhm.
It felt very final when I watched the last
Yeah.
episode. And it's interesting what she's doing kind of with romance and with like a pretty common romance trope, which is like a celebrity
Yeah.
relationships. And it's
Mhm.
basically about this woman who starts dating this man who's like a Marvel actor who's like impossibly famous. Um yeah, I thought the season was really gorgeous, and I watched it in like 2 nights because the episodes are 22 minutes, so you
Amazing.
plow through them so fast. Um, but she's just really lovely. The woman, Rose Matafeo, who is
Mhm.
the star and writer of the show, and I find her incredibly talented. And well, yeah, whatever she does next, I think is going to be really
Yeah.
fantastic too. But
That is
I
that is
love
like
Starstruck.
that is my next show to watch, so I'm so glad to hear because I've heard some mixed things
It
about
doesn't.
this
Here's the
season.
thing:
Yeah.
we don't get what we want
Yeah.
as romance fans, which
Yeah.
I do have questions about, and is like,
Mhm.
it's that old question where I'm like, I don't understand why somebody ending up alone is somehow more empowering than somebody ending up in a couple where it's a
Yes.
positive relationship. And,
Right.
obviously ending up in a couple for the sake of being a couple, bad. Ending up in a couple where it's a bad relationship, I don't like that either. But
Right.
the idea of one inherently being better or more feminist than the other, I find frustrating.
Yep.
Preaching to the choir.
Yeah. No, but
You're
no,
like,
because
yeah.
I feel the same way. Yeah, I do, but I still wanna watch it because I think she is such an interesting person just in general, but like she's a former comedian. I think she still is a comedian. So she's very funny and like some of the situations are just like laugh out loud hilarious, I think. And she does like cringe humor really well, like kind of in a way that reminded me of Fleabag, but just not as depressing as Fleabag kind of got, even though I loved Fleabag, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
Um but yeah, so yeah, I agree. I think this if I had watched it before I came on here, it probably would have been on this list of like kind of gentle TV is what I think I'm calling it.
Yeah, it's really good. And also Miss Scarlet and the Duke,
Ugh,
which I don't
love.
know if that is the last season, but they finally started leaning more into the romance of it all.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I was into it.
I think it's coming. I think it is coming back for another, at least one more season. So
Great.
hopefully, but I think it's in like January. I think if I remember like my masterpiece newsletter correctly, PBS
And January's
masterpiece
not that far
newsletter.
off.
Yes,
Yeah, we'll
right.
be there
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I only just finished, and if they don't kiss this next season, though, I swear to God.
I know.
But
It's in
we have
mutiny. We
feelings, we have
will.
longing, we have looks.
Yeah. 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 I will protest if they don't at least kiss.
I know by the end. Come on, just let us have one British couple end up together. We didn't get the priest and Fleabag. Like, for the love of God,
Yeah.
I know you people are repressed, but just give us one.
Amazing.
Anyway, how can people find you? How can people keep up to date with your books
Yeah.
and you
Mhm.
and your thoughts?
Yeah, my website is daniellejacksonbooks.com. I have a monthly author newsletter. I always tell everyone it really isn't about author stuff, mostly about what TV I've been watching and what snacks I'm eating. But if I do have something
Famous.
going on, I will put in the information like events and stuff. Yeah, and then I'm mostly on Instagram at D Jackson Books, but I'm pretty much on all of the social media sites as at D Jackson Books. So you can find me wherever you please.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for coming. You're welcome back anytime. I had such a great time chatting with you.
Yay! Me
And to
too.
everybody out there, happy reading.